Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Phoenix Talks. I am Brenda Wolf, or Micah, however you know me. I'll go by anything, just don't call me late for dinner. That's all I ask. And as always, I'm joined by my beautiful co-host, Diane. Say hi, Diane, so the screen will switch over
And
to you.
hi, Diane.
Somehow I knew you were going to do that.
Of course you did.
You
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I love our conversations, and I'm going to go to my YouTube on my computer so that I can see the chat.
Yeah.
All right. And if you're watching the replay, oh, looks like it's zoomed up on me again. So here we go with that again. Um, if you're watching the replay, if you're watching live, regardless, we're going to start off tonight a little bit differently than we normally do. Felt guided to help everyone calm some because it's been a stressful several months with an ending last night. We're not going to talk politics. We're not going to talk religion. We just know that there's a lot of stress that's been involved with everything that's been going on, especially in America for the past several weeks, several months. And I just wanted to help everybody just take a moment. So if you feel comfortable, close your eyes. Take a nice, slow, deep breath in through your nose. Count to 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale through your mouth. Slow. 2, 3, 4. Nice and slow. 1. And back in through the nose on a count of 4, 2, 3, 4. And exhale even slower. 2, 3, 4. Now begin and continue at this pace or at your own pace. And just quiet the mind. Pay attention to your breathing. Focus in on that. Focus on feeling the air circulate, the precious air that brings all of us life, keeps us going, helps to make the heart beat, helps to keep the blood flowing. And just feel yourself sinking into the chair or the floor, wherever you're sitting. If you're driving, please don't do it. Save it for later. But just feel yourself releasing all of that heaviness that you've been carrying. Just feel it spreading out from your heart, almost like a soft squeegee through your arms, down into your legs, just squeegeeing all that out, nice and slow, nice and soft. Ease the tensions, ease the mind. Know you're safe. Notice the timing of the sirens in the background. A reminder of safety. And just sit there for a moment. I'm going to shush. And as you come back, open your eyes slowly. You can do this as many times as you want. You can do this whenever you want. Don't really need my guidance. Just come back to your center, come back to the peace, squeegee off the stress. All right. So, last time we met, Diane and I were talking about grief, mostly focusing on various loss, various forms of loss. And during the conversation, it was brought up that we should have a singular night that focused on children. So I'm calling this episode Little Angels, because when we experience loss in general, it's difficult. But when it's the loss of a child, it's even more difficult. Which direction, Diane, do you want to start taking this in tonight?
Well, let's talk about the directions that are the options for us, because I feel like with this, there's so many different categories, and I'm sure I'm not going to capture them all, but the ones that I can come up with off the top of my head. Two main categories: the loss of a child that through death, and the loss of a child through not connecting with them in this life for various reasons, whether it be mental health related or divorce related, that kind of loss where you're separated from your child whilst they're still living a separate life. So, and then within the death category, there's more subtitles, more subheadings, excuse me.
Yeah.
Um, you know, in what way? Accidental, suicide, medical, sickness. There's so many different levels of grieving to each of these components. So we can go in quite a few directions. I'll let you decide where to start.
The it's interesting because I hadn't even thought of this until you were bringing up um, the disconnect with children while they're still living.
Mhm.
And when there is an accident or an illness that changes the brain chemistry, alters behavior, alters personality, that what came to mind was, this isn't my child anymore. I don't know who this is.
Mm.
And feeling that complete disconnect of, who are you? And not being able to say it without being looked at by other people of, well, it's your child, of course, but it's not who is recognized.
Yeah.
And there may not it may not even be a mental, it could also be a physical major change. I mean,
Right.
wow, talk about an interesting segue,
Go for it.
because there is a huge physical change that has, I don't like using this word, but it comes to mind, popular, or at least enhanced. I don't consider it popular, so before anybody starts going down that rabbit hole, please don't. I do not mean any negativity about this. I'm actually currently still married. Um, but changing gender
Mm.
and the loss of a child that way.
Mm. So many avenues for us to go down. What do we want to focus on though? Because there are so many different circumstances to how one might experience that level of disconnect from their child. So I guess we're starting the topic with the child is still here, but you've disconnected in this life. So there's no contact.
Right.
And that is a loss because they're still here and there's no contact. So I guess maybe we'll talk about how does a parent work through some of that and process the reality of having that no contact, regardless of whatever the circumstances are, because it's going to look different for different circumstances. Um, I mean, I first want to preface all of this by saying I'm not at all qualified to have this conversation, but I'm having it because I still understand some of the stuff that I've heard that is useful and helpful, and some of the stuff that I've heard that is painful.
Hmm.
So I could just share what I've learned. That's really it. So I'm not putting myself as any qualified
I'll
person
second
to speak
that.
on this topic.
I'll second that because I'm not qualified. And many times, if I were presented with a question on how do you deal with this, I don't know how to deal with this,
Right,
it would be a journey that I would actually go on with that person asking that question if they were willing
right.
to help
I can only
discover what was going to.
Right. And I can only speak to what I've learned from individuals who I've communicated with extensively, going through their own personal situation and involving these circumstances.
Right.
So from what I've shared, from what I've seen, it is still a grieving process where you go through the having to acknowledge it and accept it in order to, maybe get mad about it. Um, uh, all the range of emotions and the steps of grieving do take place with the no contact as well. There is some, from what I've gathered, there is some understanding as to radically accepting that whatever the child is meant to experience in their own personal life, that's what they're meant to experience. And for whatever reason, part of that experience includes excommunicating you from their experience. And that's something that is at the end of the grieving process that comes as an acceptance. So and that's kind of hard to swallow if you're like, well, I don't understand because this shouldn't be happening. Okay, yeah, it sucks. It hurts like a bitch. There's no other way to put it.
And this aspect of loss of a child, I can relate to.
Okay. You want to share?
For 11 years, I was a step parent to three girls
Okay.
who I hardly have talked to in more than a decade.
Wow.
And whatever the reasons are, whether it's because I didn't reach out, because they didn't reach out, because things that they were told prevented them from reaching out, whatever the case is, whatever the underlying reasons are, when I left that relationship, I lost being a parent.
Mm.
And having that disconnect and having to watch driver's licenses, graduations, babies, marriage from a distance without an invite, without a, hey, guess what? That's my experience for loss of children.
So let's talk about the rejection that comes with that, the feeling of rejection that comes with that. Because that has to be part of the grieving process, is the understanding of the rejection and what that feels like. Um, that's a tough one because each circumstance is different, but just overall and
Yeah,
generally, it's just a circumstantial thing. Generally speaking, though, um, remind yourself that that child is having their own experience, and they're also children being influenced by whatever is surrounding them. And there are going to be times where maybe that child's heart isn't disconnected from you, but the rejection is a product of whatever they're experiencing and to trying to navigate through their own circumstances and please the people around them for their own
right,
safety and survival kind of thing. Okay,
right.
so remind yourself that they're having their own experience and maybe it's not really a rejection, it's a matter of they're just having their own experience, and this is the choices that they're making based on their own experiences right now, and those influences. Um,
We have a
some,
question from Karen in the chat you've got the mic. How can a parent then still show them that we're here for them?
you could reach out if you're allowed to. I mean, I know some circumstances there's legalities that prevent that. But you don't feel bad reaching out if they're an adult and you're allowed to. I mean, legally allowed to,
Yeah,
because again, circumstances are different. You can, and I would stick to the three gates. Is it true? Is it relevant? Is it kind? And when you're reaching out, stick to the facts, stick to that, and just express and be consistent with it. Just keep at it. And I'm not saying harass them. Use your discernment, please, on when you might want to reach out
right,
and how often, because again, every circumstance is different. I cannot stress that enough. You have to use your discernment, but the only thing you can do is show up differently, show them a different version of you, and make that consistent and give them the compassion that maybe they wanted at some point and didn't see based on, again, circumstances and
right,
influences. And don't forget, especially when their kids are developing and you're watching them grow up, and then there's things that happen with family dynamics and circumstances that prevent you from meeting their needs. Let's put it that way.
right.
That leads
And I agree
to,
with another comment from Bryce. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Appreciate you being here.
thank you.
His comment was letting the child know you were there for them if when they want to connect. And I 100% agree with that, and I have. And the truth of the matter is, if they are happy with or without my presence, that's what matters.
Right, right,
I will, for me personally, and anybody listening, I will allow myself to heal from that. And I have been allowing myself. It's not easy. It's literally almost as if they transitioned from one life to the next.
right,
In essence, they did, because
right,
they transitioned from a life with me to a life without me.
right.
And they also had to go through, and may still be, whatever grieving process they had, if they had it. I don't want to assume. So letting them know, absolutely, that, hey, you ever want to talk? I'm here. Doors open.
Right. And that's really all that matters. You don't know what their life is gonna have in it and what's gonna come up for them. And if they reach out, they reach out. If they don't, they don't. They still have free will and are making their choices based on whatever their experiences and influences are. It's,
Yeah.
and then you have to work through those feelings of helplessness,
Mm-hmm.
because there's that too. So there's a little bit different pieces that comes along with losing a child that's not gone.
And I would say that similar rules or guidelines would apply if the transition was to a transgender,
Right,
because it is going to be the loss of a child. A new life is going to begin. An old life is going to end.
right,
And there can either be a loss because of personal reasons and setbacks or beliefs, program, however you want to look at it. There can be that disconnect. Well, okay, all right, this is your decision. We're no longer. That's your decision. If that's
it is. And in that sense, that's really less of, it's more of the parent disconnecting than the child disconnecting.
right.
So that's a different kind of grief, again, another category.
Yeah,
It's another category because of the dynamic is different because the child just wants to be loved. They don't they don't feel like they're a different person. They feel like they're not the real them.
Right.
And so if the parent is looking at it, yes, you do need to, okay, you had in your mind all this stuff. If let's say you went from male to female, I'm just going to pick one, okay? Let's say you had all this stuff in your mind as a parent of what that male child was going to
Hmm.
be develop as. Remind yourself that your children are you're not yours. They're not your property. You brought them into this world. You're meant to um, give them the most loving environment that they can have so that they can be a stable human being going forward. You don't get to decide how they experience their life. You get to guide them, you get to influence them. But again, if in their core being something doesn't feel right, understand that it's it's just a different way of having that same child, and that child might be more authentically themselves, which will make them thrive. So it's
It's also
different dynamic.
it's also one of the very few losses that can be prevented.
Yeah. So it's a how you view it maybe, and do you want to connect to the core being that your child is, and recognize that that core being is needing to thrive in its own unique way, or choose to disconnect from that child because it's just a difference, and it is what it is. I'm not judging. There's no judgment here. It just
Right.
is what it
Right.
is. Difference in what you want to experience. It's a difference in what you want to experience because you have as much free will as your trans child does.
Right.
Um,
I
I
mean,
don't know.
we could have a whole nother conversation about parental choices on
Yeah,
on child rearing, raising, what to look out for, this, that, and the other thing.
that's a whole
And
personal thing.
as I'm watching the chat, that's why I'm bringing that
No.
now, because there a lot of the questions that are being and statements that are being made in the chat, that there's not a loss of a child, there's just a disconnect from parent to child, and
Correct.
we can maybe take care of that in a different episode,
Right.
because
Yeah.
tonight we really want to close the book on grief for at least a little bit.
Right. Right. So I would focus more on the loss being of the child disconnecting from you and choosing to do that, where you have to deal with now the rejection of it and
Right.
the other emotions that come up with it on top of the grief and the unknowing if you're ever going to reconnect. So that's a little bit more to unpack, and so reminding yourself of them having to have their own experience and just being consistent with showing up differently and reminding them that you're there, and that's there's not much else you can do other than to allow yourself to go through the process of healing. I don't want you to live in resentment, that's for sure, because that's not healthy for you either. Uh, there's a lot to work through emotionally when it comes to this level of loss or this type of loss.
Right.
There's some of that too that crosses over into when you lose a child in via death in different ways, whether it be suicide, accidental, or medical. Um, so there's a lot of extra stuff to process. For example, like if the child died by suicide, you're left trying to understand, what did I miss? What could I have done? There's now all of this guilt going to happen within you. So how do you process that? And I just keep going back to this child is having their own experience. They're living their own life.
And while it may come across to some who are listening that it's harsh to say that,
Yeah.
And it might be, but at the same time, being able to bring yourself to the place where you can recognize that that is a truth.
Right.
Because when you were growing up, you wanted to have your own experiences, you wanted to have your own pathways, you made your own discoveries. And when you're thinking about your child and you want them to be able to do the same thing, that can't be forced.
Mhm.
Can't
Right.
feel guilty if they don't make the decisions that you wanted them to. I'm about to have a cat in my lap. Sorry.
No
I'm
problem.
trying to prevent. Yes, he's very distracting.
It's all good. Well,
All
I know that guilt is probably one of the biggest things that is
right.
struggled with in a lot of different ways. And guilt is kind of the same, also ties into um, losing your child who's still with us, but decided to cut you off. So those two share a lot of parental guilt, coulda, shoulda, wouldas. Remind yourself you did the best you could based on the information that you had. And the child is also doing the best that they can, considering what they're trying to navigate through in potentially unhealthy waters if the adults in their lives are not um, emotionally regulated or as emotionally regulated as they think they are. And, we could be emotionally regulated and not realize how we're affecting our children
Mm-hmm.
because they're, again, children. They don't have their frontal lobe completed to understand consequences and connect dots in ways that adults can. So their decisions are not going to be um, rational if their emotional dysregulation is at the point of taking their own life.
Right.
And so you have to understand that you might not have been able to reach them. Same thing with the disconnected, I'm going to call it the disconnected parent, the intentionally disconnected parent. Um, you may not have been able to reach them in their place of whatever darkness that they're going through and navigating through themselves. Um, One chose the path of taking their own life, one chose the path of cutting somebody off. It's still, you have to work through compassion for yourself as a parent and giving yourself a lot of grace for just having limited information yourself. There's nothing that you could have done differently to make things different. The child is still going to do what the child is going to do, whatever that looks like.
And there's a trigger warning, um, because what I'm about to say is going to hurt. When it comes to someone unaliving themselves, it is not because of or about you. There may be reasons that you had provided. There may have been experiences that were missed. There may have been clues that were given. There may have been begging, whatever the case is. But the hardest thing to recognize and understand is that when that decision is made, it is not because of or about. They made that decision on their own.
Yeah.
We could have another full discussion on unaliving. We're not tonight, so
No, not
I don't want
tonight.
us to get trapped in that. But
No,
that did need to be said.
it did. It did, because that's a tough one. And that's again, depending on the there's a lot going on to unpack. So this is all very general and just basic. Let's get you started on what perspective might help you through the process. The big question across the board is, uh, does it go away? Does it get easier? How do you live with it? All that stuff, because no parent wants to leave their child. No parents wants to be without their child. It doesn't feel natural, and it certainly uh, isn't fair in any direction.
To
So,
bring a lighthearted moment into the picture, I have the scene from Steel Magnolias that took place in the cemetery when Malin is screaming.
oh God, I've cried like a baby. I sobbed. Oh God,
I sobbed and then
I
I laughed
sobbed like a
hysterically.
baby for
But
that scene.
and then I laughed hysterically.
Oh God,
But that is the biggest question. I mean, she embodied that question so well
right.
that any parent who watched that and had any connection with that movie when they were watching it felt.
The pain of a parent losing a child.
Yeah, because
Right.
they're not supposed to go first.
That one is sickness. That one's another whole meat and potatoes, because that is a very like slow, painful, torturous way of losing your child, like where you're there present and assisting in the whole process of them leaving you. That's a pain that is on its own category, because the guilt that comes with that territory, uh, because you're trying every medical avenue. Unfortunately, I've known a parent and uh, learned their stories
Mhm.
in every category that we're talking about.
I mean, when a loss is sudden or unexpected, there's less attachment to what happened. When it's a sickness that's long drawn out, you hear songs, you eat food, you see people, you hear sounds,
Right.
conversations are had, and um,
You never want to set foot in a hospital again.
there's yeah, because there's triggers present that are created.
Right.
So you might hear something. No, I don't want to hear that. You might smell a food. No, I never want to eat that again
Right.
because it constantly brings back that reminder.
Right. Right. And then watching your family dynamic change in the process of losing the child, you're almost losing your family in a way, because the whole family changes when it comes to a sickness that overtakes for a long period of time the entire dynamic.
Mhm.
Whew, so how do we navigate through this one? Because this one, and this is an open conversation. Um, the way I've assisted my clients in this is just reminding them to tap into the energy. And obviously, you have to go through the same thing. You got to go through the grieving process. You have to allow yourself all the stages of grief
Mhm.
at your own timing. But the additional stuff that comes with this one is giving yourself compassion and understanding, and working through that helplessness you're feeling, because there really is, you really couldn't fix her body or his body.
Right.
You couldn't do anything to fix that child. So that level of helplessness will make you stew in that guilt, and that will eat you away. And that means that everyone in your life is going to lose you. So as a parent, you don't want to fall off the planet. And I mean, honestly, that could happen with any of these circumstances and situations, but I've noticed this a little bit extra in those who've lost their child with sickness, because it changes the entire dynamic of the family.
Right.
So that's why
And
I'm
there's anger that extends outwards towards members that aren't helping
yeah,
or have an opinion
right,
or why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Why aren't you having the doctors take care of this? And all of these questions. Meanwhile, you may be the one parent who's been completely present throughout the entire process, knowing, having all of the conversations, knowing all of the information, and just not having the fucking spoons to talk about it. And that's okay.
That is okay. It's totally okay. It's it's almost like you have to heal from the trauma of going through the sickness with the kid.
Hmm.
That's really, it's traumatic. It's a traumatic experience for the whole family in that sense. Every death of a child is traumatic. It just looks different in different circumstances. So that's why I'm trying to cover bases in different ways. Uh, at the core of all of these bases, though, is self-compassion, self-understanding, circumstantial understanding, appropriate responses to those circumstantial understandings, and allowing yourself permission to, at some point, radically accept the circumstances just for what they are. And I know that's a painful statement, and if you're not there, that you're not there. That's fine.
Trigger warning has been out for this
Yes, it's
particular
just
episode.
at some point it'll get to there. Does the pain go away? No, it looks different. Do you ever stop grieving? No, it just looks different as time goes on and as you shift where your focus goes, because the beginning of the grieving is more focused on the pain and the torture and the torment of the circumstances. And then as your focus shifts, if you allow yourself to grieve and go through the wave of emotions that you need to over time, you'll start to focus more on the tuning into the energy of love and joy that you had with that child. And this is true too for, all of this is true across the board, including if you just suddenly lost your child, whether it was an accident or something like that. Um, and it was unexpected. You still have to go through the gamut of emotions and allow yourself permission to um, accept it as it is and learn how to make it part of your experience in a way that you can live with.
Hmm.
And I can only suggest over time, when the time is right, allowing your focus to be on that loving energy, that joyful times, the what gifts you exchanged these gifts with that child, and allowing yourself to feel that love again from those moments. Feeling that love, yes, can be painful, but there's so much joy and grace and gratitude in that pain. So I invite you to allow yourself to attempt to sit with it and allow yourself to feel that love again. That love is always with you. If you can remember the negative crap, of course you can remember the wonderful stuff. We tend to forget about that. So that's where the focus can shift into. With parents who lost their child because of an accident where it was or something unexpected, whatever that might be. Um, and that could look like anything. Uh, the shock of the situation and the limbo that you're going to feel for an extended period of time. Try to give yourself some encouragement through it to not get stuck in that limbo, because that avoidance that you're practicing to face the reality of the situation is going to affect your life in a negative way. It's going to start making you self-sabotage, and that's not what anybody wants for anybody. So give yourself permission to um, let it sink in and work yourself through the shock of it, because I think a lot of people get stuck in that shock for years and don't even recognize it because they're just emotionally turned off or shut down, maybe.
Hmm.
I've seen parents emotionally shut down,
Yeah,
and that means
I actually observed that this past weekend. And
okay.
you and I have been wondering why we got stalled last week.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah,
why.
I've been holding on to this, waiting to tell you until tonight.
Well, now is it. Let's go. Wow.
Um, I attended two memorials on Saturday.
Wow.
The second one was for a cousin from previous relationship. Won't go into all the details, but he was only 41 and his parents are still around. I was standing on the front porch. Now, I've known his father for years. He's very boisterous, kind of a pain in the butt when he's talking, very opinionated. Great guy, though. Don't get me wrong, he's a great guy. But I watched him move away from the crowd after he got a plate of food. And he sat down on the steps to the porch, facing the crowd, only kind of nibbling on his food, with just a blank stare forward. And recognizing that the deep cut that he experienced. And I can only imagine what was going through his mind. Because he watched, there was a year or two of illnesses, sickness, whatever. I don't know exactly the details, but there was a lot that transpired to try and keep his son alive. That just didn't, in the end, work.
Yeah.
And he's a proud man. Not easy to make him show emotions or get him to, unless it's resentment and anger. But I assumed, based on carriage, demeanor, that he was a man trying to hold on and not cry.
Right.
And to anybody who just heard that story, feels that way, stop. If you have a moment where you need to release and cry, do it. Don't hold it in. It just becomes toxic and eats away.
I think the struggle is the acceptance part, the radical acceptance of the circumstances as they are, because unless you actually accept the circumstances as they are, you're doing things like grieving is going to make it real. And
Yeah.
you're not ready for that if you're not acknowledging it for what it really is. That's that shock you get stuck in, that the trauma that you're not healing from not being able to help the child through the sickness. The guilt you're hanging on to from the child choosing to leave you, whether by suicide or cutting you off.
There's a list that I think that a lot of people make when they're grieving. If I had ...
I don't recommend making a list. That's
No,
not my recommendation.
no, you already have. I don't think that they should, because
Yeah.
most people have already made a list of what shoulda, woulda, couldas that they're drowning themselves in.
No, and it's hard to tell you to focus on compassion when you're going through it. So I think really it's kind of just let's let you know that it's okay. This is what it looks like. Please give yourself permission to go through it. And I
Yeah.
think that's probably the base of the message is give yourself permission to go through it. It doesn't go away. It just changes, but you need to learn how to live with it. So don't make your life have that the emotions that are toxic for you take over. So the idea is to bring yourself to a place of where you carry it with you in a way that you're not draining yourself from it all the time. So it's a matter of going through the process of grieving to help you carry that grief with you in a way that isn't going to send you spiraling downward. Self-compassion, self-forgiveness, giving
It's
yourself permission.
actually, I've been following along in the chat, but they're having almost their own conversation, which is fine. I love seeing that.
Okay.
But forgiveness has been a huge part of that conversation.
Yeah.
And
How do you forgive yourself when
yeah,
you
you just went on
think,
that branch. Let's climb on it. And
yeah, how do you forgive yourself when you are taking full responsibility for your child's death or disappearance? Um, again, reminding yourself that that child is having their own experience, for the circumstances where that fits, where there's a choice that was made, and for the ones where no choice was made and they were just, that's what they had to go through. In any of these circumstances, there is nothing that you could have done that would have changed the circumstances. It still was going to happen. And that's something that is hard to digest and wrap your head around. It's almost like you have to release yourself from responsibility to it because you're taking responsibility for it. And the responsibility, even if you feel like it should have fell on you, it really was out of your hands and control to begin with, and never was in your hands to begin with, especially when you know you've exhausted everything that you could have possibly done. And that's, people get stuck in that loop of continuously asking themselves questions. Well, what if I this and what if I that? That's not what was experienced in the experiences that you were presented with. That's what you were presented with.
right, the
So,
rest is just overthinking.
and that's very natural and normal to do with this
Yeah.
whole process because that's part of the understanding, but don't get stuck there. You have to allow yourself to move through it and accept. Every stage, I think, requires a certain level of acceptance, including the forgiveness. You need to accept that you're not responsible for it the way you feel responsible for it, and you need to forgive yourself for what you feel like you didn't get to do or shoulda, coulda, wouldas, because the reality still remains the same. Things would not have been different.
Hmm.
And that's hard to hear, I know. I hope this helps. I don't know if this is helpful. Again, neither of us are taking responsibility for being an expert in this
No,
circumstance. I can only go based on what I've experienced through clients and friends that have spoken to me with regards to their personal circumstances.
I mean the and I meant to actually bring this up at the beginning, but got distracted. For those of us like me who haven't actually had children, no, I helped raise children. I did consider them my daughters and stepdaughters, but fur babies.
Mm. Ooh, that's a different leg of it.
Almost everything we have said,
Yeah,
almost everything we have said
yeah,
applies to fur babies.
yeah. But I also want to loop losing your animal into losing your child's animal when they've left. And then having to take on that child's animal, and then that child's animal passes away. And there's that sense of loss all over again because you're losing that part of your child again.
This is actually how we decided to have this conversation because that came up last time we were together.
That's right. That's right.
Talk about full circle.
Yeah. Yeah. But also something that is experienced and needs to be walked through. There's going to be all kinds of circumstances like that when it comes to um, the loss of a child in any way, the reminders, the triggers, the new milestones of not having holidays and birthdays. And it's like that first year is probably the worst
Hmm.
without their presence. Um, but again, it's a matter of learning how to walk through the grief so that you could get to a state where you're walking with that grief and not self-sabotaging, where you're able to function with that grief being present and just can tune into that love energy and that joy and those wonderful memories that you hold.
Oh, wow.
What came up?
It's not fair that I am still here and they aren't.
Right.
Here's what's not fair. It's not fair that you left with them while you still have the opportunity to be here. Wow. That's going to sting people. Sorry. But
Elaborate on that. Make it broader.
when, like going back to the Steel Magnolias scene, it's not fair. I was always ready to go first. Well, didn't happen that way. If you've lost a child or if you've lost a fur baby, I mean, good grief, if we go before a fur baby does, that's really bad. So anyway, showing the mic a weirdness here. But when there is that loss and it feels unfair that it happened prior to what you expected, sure, it's not fair to have been the person to made the creation that just left and witness it. It's not fair, no, to anyone. But is it fair to you to lose two people in the process? I don't
That
think.
one- that one's the not fair thing. It affects parents in a different way because of the fact that no parent, not I'm a parent, I am a parent. I don't want to outlive my children. I mean, I don't want to outlive my children. That's not how it's supposed to go. I want my kids to have a beautiful, full life. On a spiritual level, I'm going to go there
Okay.
because I feel like this is a conversation that might need something like that. Um, we don't disappear. I think I've mentioned this before. We don't die. We're just energy
Mm-hmm.
in a physical body having a human experience. So understand that you do have access to communicating with that child, and maybe not in a conscious sense where you're having a conversation, but just the same, no different than some people call it prayer, doing mantras, doing intentions, whatever you want to call it for yourself. You do have the ability to tune into that child's energy and send and feed love to that child still. It's not out of your reach. So I just want to reassure parents that, and pay attention to signs. I know a lot of parents see signs, oh, she loved butterflies. Now I'm seeing butterflies everywhere. Yes,
Yeah.
there's communication happening, and that's going to happen. Acknowledge that. That'll help you through the process and understanding that um, it's okay to move on. It's okay. And you're not moving on. You don't get over it. It doesn't work that way. It's you learn how to live with it. You just learn how to incorporate it into your everyday so it doesn't interfere with your everyday.
Right.
That's that's where it goes. The it's not fair is tied to guilt and resentment. It may not be fair. No, it definitely isn't fair. It's not. That's something that it's okay to feel that way. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's not fair. You can't let that run your life though. You have to allow yourself to go through the grieving process. because I've unfortunately also known individuals that get stuck in that it's not fair stage, and then they fall into this deep victimhood mentality, and their life changes. Unfortunately, their health declines. My concern is for the
That-
parents that are
yeah,
here.
that's why I brought that up,
Hmm.
because that was the branch that it was showing me, is by getting stuck in that that's not fair, it should have been me. Well, now you're wishing it upon yourself, and that stop.
Yeah, and I feel like crying because there's a very personal circumstances close to me and close to my heart. A dear friend of mine who went through the torture of medical loss of a child, and the it's not fair and the it should have been me is always top of the list. And the prayers of take me, not them, that whole torturous uh part
My
of it.
message to her would be, the child was stronger than you to go through what she endured, and she wouldn't have been able to handle what that child experienced.
Yeah. Even in sickness, even in accident, even
Yeah.
in suicide, even in disconnection, that child is still having their soul is still having their own experience, whatever that looks like on this human plane. And they experienced illness, they experienced being hit by a car, they experienced, a drowning, they experienced deciding that they were better off not being here and taking their own life. They decided to make a decision based off of influences around them and walk away from one parent, because there's plenty of that in divorce situations and whatnot.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, there's so many different planes to this. The core of all of what we're talking about, I feel like, is to help parents know that it's totally normal and okay, that it sucks and it just does, and that's okay. And the idea is to learn how to um, carry the grief in a way that is manageable and shift your perspective into that of reminding yourself of um, the love and the joy. You can do
Remember,
plenty.
it's not your fault.
No, it's not. And you can't.
99% of the time, or 99.99% of the time, it's not the parent's fault. We won't go into the ones that counter that statement, but it's not your fault.
Mhm. Right.
Allow yourself forgiveness for all the things you did or didn't do. Allow
Mhm.
yourself forgiveness for all the things that you didn't know you could have done.
Right.
Don't think about the things you should have done.
Right.
Think about the joys that you had in the moments that you were gifted
Right.
before they ended, before they were taken away.
Right. Are there any more questions in the chat?
No, but they are going to have to figure out a way to connect so that they can finish the chat, because once we end the broadcast, so will the chat.
There was the
So
warning.
there's your warning, guys. We're getting ready to close. So
We are,
if you
because we're
want to
coming up
connect
on an
on
hour.
afterwards, please make sure that you share with each other.
Yeah.
But yes, definitely. Um,
I hope this conversation was somewhat helpful. I never know with these types of conversation because it's not like it's hard to do this general because of each
it really is.
situation being so specific and unique. So that's why the giant trigger warnings and disclaimers, because it's just a matter of trying to help folks understand that it's okay to feel like shit. And yes, it sucks. And it it's not going to go away, but it's how you walk through the grieving and navigate through it that dictates how you're going to carry that grief with you through your life.
Right.
And
And
I'll share something personal. My very good friend, trans woman, just by chance, only because that came up earlier. Otherwise, this doesn't really matter. It's irrelevant. She lost her son in a motorcycle accident, and she really that shock of losing him is still raw, but they were able to turn it into a positive and get a sign put on that street corner, and got X, Y, and Z done in place with the local law to prevent future accidents like that from happening. So they took the energy of that loss and poured it into making a difference so that it doesn't repeat with someone else going forward. And I guess I just bring that up to say, like, you can do stuff to remember, like in remembrance of, and it doesn't
Mhm.
have to be something like that. That was specific to that circumstance, but you can do stuff specifically that reminds you of a joy that you had with them. Like maybe they were the ones who decorated the table for Christmas. So maybe, or what, I'm just throwing something out there. Maybe carry that on for them or add to it in a different way with make it a family thing. Like, okay, let's all do something in honor of her kind of. I'm again throwing,
I'm hearing invite them to dinner.
okay,
Set a
set a
place if you need
plate.
to. Set a place
Some
if you need to, and invite them to dinner.
It's just a matter of allowing yourself to remind yourself that they're gone but not forgotten, and their presence is tune-inable.
Right. And it's funny that you were just mentioning this because I was literally about to say almost the same thing. Funny, ironic, funny, because I was going to all of the viewers who were watching either live or in the replay. If you still have your kids, anchor a memory, put it into something physical, an anchorable memory
Or do
that,
something physical, ritualistically or symbolically, go
yeah,
on a
but
trip. Some
something
people.
while they're still here that you anchor
Mhm.
that joy, that moment. And if you've already lost, condolences, go back to an anchor, go back to a moment. When you're starting to feel all of the feelings that we described, find that object, find that picture, find that story, find that memory that brings back the feeling of them being with you because energetically they still are.
And I'm sorry to all the grieving parents out there. It's not easy.
No matter how they may be grieving about or no matter what kind of loss they may have experienced from their children,
Right,
living or otherwise.
right.
But we have gone almost over an hour today.
I know we did. I hope it was helpful. I don't know. I mean, it's one of those topics that it's so unique and individual. It's hard to be general about it, but I hope that we did something good for everyone.
So I'm fairly certain we gave things to consider, think about, take a different look at. And if it made you angry, good. I just need to say that because if it made you angry, good. That means you still feel. That means you still have the capability of emotion, of expression, of recognizing that you don't like something. You still have that capability. So congratulations if you are angry by anything that we have said today. But if not, I hope you got something out of it. I don't know what our topic is next week.
I think it's my turn. I'll come up with it. I'll figure it out.
I will go ahead and put out that October, we're in November now, Micah. November 20th, there will not be a Phoenix Talks as I'm going to take a quick purposeful break before Thanksgiving. We may or may not be on for the week of Thanksgiving, but we'll let you know.
Okay,
So
sounds good to me.
make it a great week.
and sit with your heart and your grief for a minute and just see what it's telling you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so much love to
So
you.
much love. We love you all.
Yes, we
Thank
do.
you.
We love you. And thank you
Micah.
for tuning in. Thanks for the conversation in the live chat. Don't forget to subscribe. And I'll be putting the link to Evolve and Emerge in the description so you guys can come and join. One more reminder, I have the Subscribe and Rise coming up this Sunday. It's at 1 p.m. You must sign up via the link in Evolve and Emerge or in the replay of this. So don't forget, the first attendance is free and there's no commitment to pay until 14 days are up. So, and we can continue this conversation then if you need to and you are part of that group, but it's members only. So have a wonderful week. We will see you next week and keep going. Make it a great week. We love you.